I'm Tom from DIY Life Tech, and this is an answer to the question of whether the Nespresso maker is bad for the environment. And a lot of people think, this must be wasteful because each time you brew a coffee, you're using one of these little capsules from Nespresso here. And then when you throw these away, it sort of feels like you're hurting the environment in doing that. But actually, it's a lot more complicated than that. And it turns out that the Nespresso maker is not bad for the environment after all, at least compared to alternatives. So a couple reasons for that. One is that these capsules are actually made entirely out of aluminum, and aluminum is actually one of the most recyclable materials out there. Unlike plastics that can be challenging to recycle, some of the single-serve coffee makers use, these are actually aluminum, and again, that can be melted down and recycled very readily. The catch is that you can't usually just throw these capsules into your home recycling because they need to be specially processed. The exception is there's a few cities, for example, New York City, if you live in New York, Nestle actually paid over $1 million to upgrade the machines in the recycling plants in New York City so they can process these capsules in the normal recycling. So if you live in New York City, you're in luck. You can throw this right in your normal recycling bin. It'll be recycled at the recycling center, the aluminum melted down and turned into all kinds of parts, including potentially new capsules. So that's part of why this is an more eco-friendly option than you might think. If you don't live in an area, though, where it's automatically recyclable, you can also request a bag from Nestle and just go to a Nespresso store. You can go to their website and request a recycling bag, and you can actually put these capsules in. You can get a bag that stores about 200 of them. One tip is to keep it in the freezer so it doesn't start to smell. And you just save these up and then bring them back to an Nespresso store, or you can send the bag in and they will recycle them for you. So, not as bad for the environment as you would expect, especially if you're taking these and actually recycling them. And it's nice that they are made with that aluminum that is very recyclable. But even without that, even if you're not recycling them, it turns out there was a study done that actually looked at the total impact of different methods of brewing coffee. And it found that single-serve coffee makers like this are actually the second best for the environment. And the reason for that is that when you brew with a single-serve coffee, you're only brewing using exactly the amount of grounds that are needed to brew that cup of coffee or that shot of espresso. And your coffee maker actually detects exactly how much water to push through for the amount of grounds that it knows are in one of those single-serve pods. And in contrast to brewing coffee using a traditional drip coffee maker where you're sort of guesstimating, you're usually using too much grounds, the water's just dripping through so it's not extracting as much coffee. You actually end up wasting grounds, ultimately. You end up using more than you need to. Versus here, again, the water is perfectly portioned, the amount of grounds are perfectly portioned, and it's extracting a lot from the grounds because it's pushing the water through at a high pressure and a high temperature. So it's actually a very efficient way to use those grounds. And it means that you get more coffee for each unit of actual coffee grounds that are used. And on the producer side, on the grower side, that means that it's a more efficient use of the land and the transportation of those grounds and the processing of them. And it turns out that actually, even if you throw your pod away and you're wasting, quote unquote, wasting these little pods each time, you're still actually using less of the grounds of coffee, and that means less impact on the environment from the agricultural aspect and the shipping aspect, and that actually more than offsets the bad aspects of throwing away that single-serve pod. So you can actually feel good about using the single-serve pods, even if you throw them away, even if you don't recycle them, because again, it's a more efficient use of the grounds, and ultimately, studies have shown that that means less environmental impact because there's less coffee that needs to be grown to brew the same amount for you, less of the coffee grounds that need to be grown. So that's really interesting. It's kind of unexpected, not what I would have thought looking at Nespresso pods. Turns out that the best, most sort of green way to drink coffee is actually to do something like this, instant coffee, because here all of the grounds go directly into the drink. There's really nothing wasted here. But failing that, most people probably don't want to wake up and drink instant coffee. The single serve is actually the second best option, and then drip coffee comes in later in terms of greenness. So surprising there a little bit. The other aspect to that is that the Nespresso maker will only actually heat the water and push water through when you're brewing. And then when it's done, it's not really heating anything, not keeping the coffee warm. So it doesn't use as much electricity as a traditional drip coffee maker, where it's going to run at full tilt through the whole brew cycle. Usually there's a warmer that keeps everything warm underneath. And that's great. I mean, I love brewed drip coffee, and it's nice to have warm coffee for a group for a long time. But if you're just making a single serve for yourself, you're actually going to use less electricity because this will heat up, brew the coffee, and then shut back down again. And that means also less environmental impact. So particularly if you recycle the pods, you're reducing your impact even further. But even if you don't, it turns out this is actually the second best for the environment, and it beats out drip coffee, even with the wasteful aspect of throwing those pods away. But if you really, really want to be great for the environment, you could always switch to drinking instant coffee, although you probably won't. So if you found this helpful in any way or interesting, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps.